Welcome back. Congressional chaos. The House has been voting since Tuesday time and again to elect a speaker, but has failed consistently with no end in sight as Republican leader Kevin McCarthy continues to fight for the gavel unsuccessfully. We'll talk about the struggles that McCarthy has faced in attaining the gavel, the main players, the impacts of it, and when we can expect to have a Speaker of the House. Plus, I'll sit down with Illinois State Representative-elect Nabeela Syed to talk politics, her career, her historic election, and more. Today, Friday, January 6th, 2023. From Ishaan Media, this is the Ishaan S Show, a podcast about the interesting and ever-changing world of American politics, with me, your host, Ishaan. Hello, and welcome back to the Ishaan S Show. Happy New Year. I am so glad to have all of you back on here after our little winter break over the past month. I know I was gone for a while. I just never came back after that episode back in November. But I had a lot of great episodes planned for you guys with a lot of interesting topics to talk about. But I unfortunately wasn't able to get that. I wanted to make those new episodes, but my schedule was very restricting, and so I wasn't able to get those episodes out, regrettably. But I'm very glad to be back, and I know I've said it a few times already on the show, but this time we are going to actually have a lot of fun because we have some great interviews already lined up and in the works, and other great things planned and being cooked up right now. I am so excited for everything we have ahead of us in 2023. But for this episode specifically, I'm very excited to have on Nabeela Syed today because she's a very well-known person among my listenership. You guys really love her, and you guys have requested this interview, and I've worked very hard to get this arranged. So I'm very excited to have her on just because she is such a well-known person, and we love having great, prominent, well-known people here on the show. But before we get to her interview, which is after the break, we'll first get into today's topic. So you heard at the top about congressional chaos. That's congressional chaos. That's a really light way to put the situation of our government right now. Now, for my friends who haven't been keeping track of what's been going on, in simple words, we don't have a speaker. Who is the speaker, you might ask, though? Well, the Speaker of the House is basically the boss of the House of Representatives. They are a member of the House who is elected to basically lead the entire House, and they're like the spokesperson, blah, blah, blah. They manage things there. The Speaker is actually, though, also a constitutional officer who is second in line for the presidency after the Vice President of the United States. The Speaker has a lot of political jobs, a lot of constitutional jobs, so I hope I've established the idea that the Speaker is a pretty important job in our government. Generally, the Speaker is elected by the majority conference or party in the House of Representatives as their leader, and so that Speaker then is put into that spot. Now, we've covered the 2022 midterms on this show, and that has definitely played a role in what we're witnessing right now, which is history in the election of a speaker and the selection of that person to lead the House of Representatives, something we have never seen before. Now, you might recall that Democrats formerly held a majority in the House, and they were led by Speaker Nancy Pelosi. But Democrats actually lost that majority in November to Republicans led by Representative Kevin McCarthy of California. What happened, though? Well, basically, they ended up winning that majority of Republicans, but Republicans ended up doing quite poorly in their showing for the midterms. They ended up only winning 222 seats. Now, it's a majority, but it must be understood that it's a very narrow majority. And that means, as I've explained before, there is very little room for error for Republican leadership in the House. Because with a simple majority requirement of 218 votes, Republicans can only really afford to lose 4 votes in order to maintain that majority. Remember that. because that number 4 is a very important number. So, Kevin McCarthy has been leading House Republicans since 2018 after former Speaker Paul Ryan retired from Congress in 2018, which left McCarthy to succeed him. McCarthy has been a pretty outspoken person as leader in the House, probably more vocal than his Senate counterpart Mitch McConnell. And another thing to note about McCarthy that he's a bit of a flip-flop, which means he's all over the place. The Republican caucus is pretty diverse in their viewpoints. They have moderates, they have center right people, they have far right people, they have all these people from all it's a diverse conference. But McCarthy ended up going everywhere. He is like a chameleon in that way. Like he will blend in with whatever faction he needs to satisfy, and that may be a good thing for a leader or a bad thing depending on your perspective. But that's what McCarthy does. Now, setting that aside, McCarthy didn't really struggle as a leader for 4 years, 2018 to 2022. He didn't face a lot of backlash or a lot of criticism. I mean, there was that time after January 6th when at first he was calling on Trump to resign privately and he was expressing disappointment, but then just days later he came out in support of Trump and went down to Mar-a-Lago to visit him. But that's different. There's been nothing notable in his criticism of Kevin McCarthy as from within his own party. But fast forward to after the midterms, and now there's this sizable majority of Republican representatives who are dissatisfied with McCarthy, not just for the poor showing in the 2022 midterms, but also for being a poor leader in general. And they accuse him of not managing the Republican conference very well. So when Republicans were electing their nominee for Speaker of the House in December, within just their own little conference, as I talked about earlier, Representative Andy Biggs of Arizona challenged McCarthy for the top job of Republican leader. Biggs ended up losing by a landslide to McCarthy with a margin of 191 to 31. You'd think, though, that would allow McCarthy to breathe a sigh of relief because 191 to 31, huge margin. But you'd be mistaken to think that. In fact, after 31 members voted against McCarthy, there was talk everywhere around D.C. of concerns about McCarthy's ability to actually win the speakership if he could only afford to really lose 4 votes. Because I'm not very good at math, but if I look at the numbers, 31 is far greater than 4. So winning, or losing rather, that many votes for speaker, it's not very good. Fast forward again to January 3rd, which was this past Tuesday, the 117th Congress had just concluded. As we talked about before, Nancy Pelosi was no longer the Speaker of the House after she relinquished her House Democrat leadership status and handed the baton to Representative Hakeem Jeffries. So what normally would occur is that each party would put up their respective leaders. So Democrats would put up Jeffries, Republicans would put up Kevin McCarthy. They come together on the House floor, vote for Speaker, Speaker wins, everybody gets sworn in, and then we have a well-functioning Congress. Well, not necessarily that last part, but we have a Congress. We have some people in a nice building that we call the House of Representatives. Now, instead, though, what has happened was there was talk after the new year about a potential group of firebrand Republican representatives from the House Freedom Caucus, who we've talked about before, potentially hijacking the Speaker election by voting for someone other than McCarthy. Now, I point this out to you because these 20 or so members of the Freedom Caucus, House Freedom Caucus, that wanted to take up this vote were very deliberate in that with the amount of people they have because, again, McCarthy can only afford to lose 4 votes. So when you need 218 votes from all members of the House to win, you're not going to get votes from the other party. You're only going to have to rely on votes from your own party. So McCarthy was really very much reliant on his party to elect him to be their speaker. And however, unfortunately for him, I guess, he was working with a very tiny majority, and so he couldn't afford to lose more than 4 votes. So when there were talks of 15 or even 20 members voting against him, that's got to have made him nervous. And rightfully so. So January 3rd, we usually have, historically speaking, one round of voting. That's the 100 years that hasn't happened that we've had more than one. One round of voting. A person wins a majority. Lucky guy goes home. Well, goes to the speaker's office. But I guess Kevin McCarthy isn't most guys. Um, we are now entering the 11th round of voting because these 20 Republicans that we're talking about that were initially led by Andy Biggs, but prominent names like Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz, Scott Perry, among others, have basically taken this process hostage and have forbidden Kevin McCarthy from winning that speakership. And we are entering the 11th round of voting. And I guess I should explain the way this thing works is the House clerk, basically this person responsible for keeping all the records, goes up to the speaker's, well, not the speaker's desk, but a desk below that on the rostrum, and recites every single member's name of the House of Representatives as a roll call, and each member has to pick their candidate for speaker. There's 434 members that this clerk has listed. Well, clerks, there are two, that they have been listing. 434 names. And they have done this 11 times. Well, they're going to do it an 11th time. They've done it 10 times. They have just consistently listed name after name after name after name. That person will then say Kevin McCarthy. They're going to say Hakeem Jeffries, what have you, or extraneous, or, other, etc. per candidate. That gets really boring, especially for political observers like me. I'm a political nerd, and even I found that boring to watch. So I can only imagine just how boring it has to be to sit in there. But we here at Ishaan Media have been covering this begrudgingly long and boring process as it has unfolded. We have finished 10 rounds of voting. Doesn't look like there's going to be there hasn't been any improvement. We're going to enter an 11th round of voting. There have been reports, though, of some sort of talks that McCarthy's lead team has been having with these 20 Republicans, but there have also been other talks with Democrats, reported and rumors, not confirmed, about talks with Democrats of potentially putting up a coalition majority, like in a parliament, where you get a coalition of members to then just put up your candidate, some compromise candidate. I don't know how seriously we can take those claims, but I know that there have been talks between McCarthy's team and these 20 Republicans to maybe make some concessions here and there to get McCarthy elected in an 11th round, but it's not looking very bright. Now, these 20 or so members have put up Representative Andy Biggs in the first two rounds of voting. And we've talked about Andy Biggs, big, MAGA-friendly guy that everybody in the Freedom Caucus loves. Then they put up Jim Jordan, somebody who's even more entrenched in MAGA world, who's loved even more by actually a lot of people in the Republican Party. However, Jim Jordan himself doesn't want to be Speaker. He wants to be chairman of the powerful House Judiciary Committee. So Jim Jordan kind of was taken out. Jim Jordan himself actually nominated Kevin McCarthy in the third or fourth round of voting. I can only imagine what he was thinking. Like, why the heck me, But Jim Jordan. Then they went to Representative Byron Donalds of Florida, who they've pretty much been nominating each time now as their candidate. He's a well-known guy in these circles in the House and in the Republican Party. So, a lot of people were throwing their support behind him. They're like, go Byron and everything, and they wanted him. Then Lauren Boebert of Colorado ended up putting up, I think, in one of the most recent today, which is the third day of voting, she's put up Kevin Hern of Oklahoma to be Speaker. Then Matt Gaetz, in his infinite wisdom, put up not representative, from former President Donald Trump to be Speaker, because if you recall from the Constitution, from Gov class, you can nominate anybody to be Speaker. It doesn't have to be a member of the House. So Matt Gaetz put up Donald Trump, and then another Congress member put up Lee Zeldin, a former representative who ran for governor of New York but didn't come back this year. Deals are being made. That's what reporters are saying. But honestly, even if McCarthy somehow does win these people's hearts, he's going to be an incredibly weak speaker. Some of the concessions include a far easier removal process of the speaker, a much smaller threshold required to actually remove him from his role as speaker. That's a big concession to make. And so when I hear that, I think, how much longer is McCarthy going to actually keep up with this? Or if he somehow wins, how long is he going to be speaker? At the risk of sounding a little biased, he's a bit of a loser. He has lost. It doesn't matter if he actually wins. At the time of the recording of this episode, we have seen him lose the 11th ballot of voting. He has lost 11 times. And McCarthy's numbers throughout this entire dreaded process, his numbers have just gone down. He hasn't seen any improvement. He's just lost voters. And so I think if he becomes speaker, I predict that he'll be one of the shortest serving speakers in U.S. history. Heck, I don't even think I'm going to see him sitting next to Kamala Harris for the State of the Union address. I mean, I think that may be a little too much, but honestly, if he's going to be this weak of a speaker, how easy is it going to be for these members to just walk all over him? And if they don't like what he does, just kick him out. I can't help but think back to Liz Truss from the UK. We covered her removal here on the show. She really didn't have a lot of support going in, and they booted her out in just 50 days. How long will McCarthy? I know the UK and the US are different and everything, but really it's the same principle. You have really weak leaders who can't actually hold on to power. And so I don't know how Kevin McCarthy is supposed to sustain as speaker unless he does something miraculous for his conference, which I don't really expect him to do, because so far he's not been doing a very good job of holding his own conference in line right now. But anyway, we here at Ishaan Media will be keeping a close watch of this speakership race. We'll be covering it, so follow the Ishaan S Show on Instagram and Twitter. Subscribe to the Political News blog. Keep checking the IshaanSshow.com. You know the drill, and we will definitely see that. So that's where the speakership election lies. When we come back, we will be joined by Nabeela Syed to talk politics, her career, her historic election, and more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short break. All right, we're back from the break. Now, before we get into our interview with Nabeela Syed, I wanted to get some quick housekeeping notes. First, this is an edited interview, which means it has been cut down. So if you want to listen to the full version of this interview, then go to the IshaanSshow.com, where you can find the full sit-down with Nabeela Syed. And second, a quick disclaimer, I do personally know Nabeela, so I wanted to get that out of the way for transparency's sake. But with that all out of the way, let's get to Nabeela Syed. The 2022 midterms happened nearly 2 months ago, and now many of the people who we were once covering here on the show are now getting sworn in and setting the next 2 years of politics. Our guest for today's episode is a product of this year's midterm cycle and has garnered not local or even state level, but in fact, national prominence over her victory in these past elections, flipping a Republican-held district blue, and is going to be the first South Asian, Muslim American, and one of the youngest people ever elected to her role. Here to talk with us about her career, the headlines, and more, we're joined by Illinois State Representative-elect Nabeela Syed. Nabeela, thank you for joining us here on the Ishaan S Show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Always. So you have a huge name for yourself in this community and communities across the state. And you've also made your way into national airwaves. But for those of my audience who don't know you that well, why don't you take a few moments to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Nabeela Syed. Like Ishaan just said, we recently won our seat in the 51st House District out here in the Northwest suburbs. So the district includes Palatine, Inverness, portions of Rolling Meadows, portions of Northern Hoffman Estates, and it goes up into Lake County, Hawthorne Woods, Killdeer, Deer Park, Long Grove, Lake Zurich, a little bit of Vernon Hills, a little bit of Buffalo Grove. So it's a fairly large district, and it is truly a privilege and an honor to be elected to represent this community. I was born and raised in Palatine. I attended Fremd High School. I'm a product of the public schools here. And it means a lot to me personally to be able to represent some of my former educators, some of the people that instilled the confidence in me to even run for office, and to have the opportunity to serve us in Springfield.
Okay, so as I did point out, with your election, you are going to be the youngest first South Asian woman, Muslim American, to be elected to the Illinois General Assembly. In order to do this, I'm sure you have had to break down barriers, cross obstacles. So describe some of the challenges that you faced in the beginning of your candidacy, especially owing to the fact that you were a 23-year-old running in this district challenging an incumbent.
Yes. Technically I was 22 at that point, so even worse in some people's eyes. But I think I remember when we initially launched our campaign, there were very few people that felt very excited about, not sorry, there were many people that felt excited about my candidacy, about our campaign, but there were many people that also expressed maybe well-intentioned caution about what we were doing. It's tough to see the kind of vision that we had and our real belief that this is our community, and we have a right to represent it, and we have an ability to get us some better leadership. And I think some folks struggle to see that because typically candidacies like mine are not, like I said, they're not typical. So I would say early on, there were folks that imply that someone who looks like me can't necessarily win this seat. People implied that I'm too young, that I should be waiting my turn, especially because we had a primary, someone had already launched, and we would have a primary opponent. Mm-hmm. And folks felt like I wasn't the safer option and that I couldn't actually beat, if we got past the Democratic primary, they didn't believe that I could actually beat the incumbent Republican in this seat as opposed to my primary opponent. And to me, hearing that, there were many different layers to that. I know there was concern about my age, there was concern about experience, there was concern about whether or not we knew what it took to flip this seat, but then there was also concern about how I looked. There's concern about me wearing a hijab and how voters would resonate with someone like me. And I'm glad, looking back, I'm glad that what we've been saying all along ended up being right. That we need to reach out to folks. We need to meet them where they're at. We need to have open and honest conversations. And I do believe that's what led to our success eventually, the way that we engage with the community very genuinely and very enthusiastically. But it was a bit disappointing to see that people couldn't get behind our vision from the get-go.
So then, looking back at high school or college, Nabeela, did you see yourself running for office at such a young age?
I don't think so. I don't think I envisioned myself running for office this young. And when the conversation started coming up, I've mentioned this in other interviews, that the first person that told me to run for office was my friend Anusha from high school. And we worked on the school board races for District 211 earlier in 2021 together. And back in March of 2021, she randomly brought it up that, I should run for state representative. And at that point, we hadn't even known about the districts being redrawn. We hadn't known, what exactly that would look like, who would exactly be running. But I think that was the first time the seed had been planted in my mind that maybe I could do this at a very young age. But, there are many obstacles that you might even put on yourself to be like, oh, well, I don't know if I have the ability to do this at age 22 or age 23. But I think voters in the community were very, very excited to see someone as young as me come to their doorstep and ask them for their support. And not only me, they were excited to see other young people who represented our campaign come to their doorstep.
All right, so let's get into some politics now. So the district you flipped, District 51, has historically been close, but a Republican-leaning district. And as I said earlier, you challenged incumbent state representative Chris Boss for his seat here. And when you did challenge him, we were entering an environment that wasn't looking very good for Democrats. But you did win, and you pulled it off by a pretty big margin at that for a district of this type. So what would you say you and your campaign did right in beating these odds and flipping this district?
I think we did what, in my opinion, every candidate, every campaign should be doing, which is talking to folks and giving people a reason to vote. So many times in politics, we have folks that run for office, but they don't really excite voters. They don't give them a reason to vote. And I think that's where you need to have open, honest, genuine conversations with folks at the doors about what is possible. And even if it's not possible, what is the benefit to having a state representative and a people in the campaign that are representing the campaign and the candidate who cares so much about getting someone elected? What kind of work ethic are we looking for in our elected officials? Where do their hearts lie when it comes to taking care of folks in the community? And what are their priorities? And I think we saw that in combination with the work that we were doing here on the ground, but then also the national environment. Many parents in the community are scared of sending their kids to school. When we have so many issues with gun violence, with mass shootings, people at the doors, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, are all wondering, when is enough going to be enough? And we've made so many of these issues so polarized that don't necessarily need to be. The same thing we saw with reproductive health care. I can't tell you how many conversations I had at the doors with men and women who are frustrated with the government in other states trying to dictate whether or not a woman could receive health care after having a miscarriage. And when we have such harmful laws being created in surrounding states when it comes to guns, when it comes to reproductive health care, people are frustrated with elected officials, and they want someone who will actually meet them where they're at and have conversations about why we shouldn't be polarizing laws, why we shouldn't be talking about partisan politics when people's lives are on the line and when there are students and young people getting caught in the mix. So I think that in common, like the work that we were doing on the ground in combination with the national environment, really shifted things for folks in this election cycle.
All right. So in a previous episode, we had one of your predecessors, Tom Morrison, on, and he did very much owe your victory to your ground operation, but he also did attribute to Democrats in general, he attributed their victory to big money being spent in politics, and big money coming from the state party, from the national party. Would you say that in any way influenced your race, or do you think that influenced any races in the area?
I think having the resources to execute a plan to communicate your message is certainly helpful. I wouldn't say that is even one of the larger reasons for victory. There was a lot of, and I would also add on to that. It's important to run a campaign that is worth people supporting. And I'm very excited that in the primary election, before we had a single cent of state party money, before we had any kind of money at all, we only had like grassroots donors. Like we had raised $250,000 independent of the support of anyone else, of any state party, of anyone, because there were so many grassroots donors that believed in our message. They believed in our campaign, and they wanted to support us. But I do think, without a doubt, that having resources helps communicate your message and helps people understand what platform you're actually standing on. And I think that is actually one of the greatest obstacles for young candidates. that is what makes politics so inaccessible, is when young candidates don't have the financial resources. I didn't put too much of my own money into this race because I'm starting out in my career as well. I started my job, and it's not like I could have dumped a lot of money of my own into the race, as we saw some other candidates do. So I think it's a huge challenge, the way that money plays a role in politics. But I'm very proud to say that, like, our campaign did have a significant amount of grassroots support, over 1,000 donors, folks that really believed and resonated with our message. And, and that I think helped us get across the finish line.
All right. So bipartisanship is a very important issue for this show's audience. Many of my listeners do really care about compromise and actually getting work done in government. So when you are sworn in, what are some policies, topics, or issues that you want to work on with your soon-to-be Republican colleagues?
I think I was talking to another state representative who's also, or an incoming state representative, and he's also a member of Generation Z. And we were talking about how we could find common ground on mental health and seeing what can be done there to support young people in our communities, in providing greater access to mental health care services. We hadn't gotten that deep into the conversation just yet, but that is a conversation that I'm looking forward to having more in depth and figuring out, where we can actually make progress. And I think he said it very well. His name's Brad. He said it very, very well in an interview, that we have the same goal of serving our communities. We really care about our communities. We really care where we're from. And we have that shared goal of legislating on their behalf. So I think that's, those are the values that we're going to bring to the table when we discuss legislation. And I think mental health care was one of those issue areas where, we both see eye to eye. People need support in our communities.
Very important issue indeed. So on that issue of topics and advocacy, you have a lot of stardom behind you right now, with a lot of notoriety and quite a large platform when you're comparing it to your colleagues. And so how are you going to use this platform to advocate for issues that you care about? What are some issues that you want to bring to light with this increased platform and presence?
I'm still trying to navigate that a little bit too myself. I am, I'm used to using social media in a very, not in a very strategic way. Throughout our campaign, I would say it's strategic. We were posting canvassing selfies. We were posting honest conversations that we were having at the doors, that I was having with constituents. And it felt very genuine. And that is the kind of authenticity, the kind of way that we want to continue to communicate with folks in the community when it comes to our legislative, our state side accounts, and also when it comes to our campaign side. And I think bringing to light what is actually happening in Springfield. There is a lot of confusion sometimes with folks in the district and with their legislators when they go off to Springfield, what actually happens. So a goal of mine is to not only break down the legislative process, but then also make it clear what issues are being worked on. And right now, I won't be sworn in until January 11th, but right now they are working on a significant gun safety, gun reform bill package that they may get passed in this week, these upcoming 2 weeks, but it may carry on to the next session. So I think, the issues that are top of mind for me are definitely gun violence prevention, and a lot of issues also related to senior residents in our community when it comes to lowering prescription costs, figuring out how we could improve our property tax system. It is incredibly flawed. And even throughout all this entire process of learning, I've realized that some of these problems were created 20, 30 years ago. And as someone who is 23 years old, it has been a little frustrating to think about, some bad governance that has happened 20, 30 years ago, 15 years ago, that is affecting, me and you, like our entire future in Illinois. So trying to figure out how we could reduce some of those problems when it comes to the financial state of Illinois and build upon the improvements that have been made in the past 4 years.
Well, that's great to hear. But Nabeela, unfortunately, we are almost out of time. But before I do let you go, are there any parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
Go Vikes. Kidding. Well, yes, go Vikes. But I would just want to say that, thank you so much for having me on. I really admire the work that you do on this podcast to, bring. I know you mentioned that it's not, you don't often see politically active folks in this community, but I would say that there are folks that are very excited about politics here, and that, you're one of them. And I really admire the work that you do. So it is a true honor to be on this show, to have been invited, and that to hear that other folks wanted to have me on as well, and that you've been getting requests. So thank you so much to everyone that requested for me to be here. And it is a true honor and privilege. Thank you so much, Ishaan.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for joining us today. I know we've been working on this interview for a long time. So thank you for making it possible. And I'm so glad that you are our first guest of the new year. We're bringing in the new year with a great guest. So thank you for answering my questions, and I look forward to having you back soon.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ishaan. Take care.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much, Nabeela.
And so that does it for us here today at the Ishaan S Show. If you like my commentary, then go ahead and follow the Ishaan S Show on Twitter and Instagram for breaking news posts and updates about the show. And if you want to learn more about political stories, then check out my political news blog on the IshaanSshow.com and go ahead and subscribe to it. Do us a favor and share this episode and all your other favorite episodes with your friends and family. It's the best way for this show to grow and get more people listening to it. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.